Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name's Bob Spencer and I chair this group. It might be useful, I think, because we've had a few new faces, if we went round just to introduce ourselves.
Jill Burnett, I'm Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny.
Derek Cookfield, Silverdale, Nutton and Keele Council.
County Councillor Mark Wilcox, representing Brentwood South.
Johnny McMahon, County Councillor, Hensford and Rawnsley.
Janet Eagland, County Councillor for Lichfield Rural North.
Richard Ford, the other Vice Chair of this committee.
David Williams, Cabinet Member for Highways and Transport, standing in for Victoria Wilson, who is away this week.
Councillor Paul Northcott, representing Newcastle Rural, and also the Cabinet Support Member for ICS, Public Health and Safeguarding.
Hi, my name is Conor Weilman and I'm the County Councillor for Winston and Brisencote, which is in Burton-on-Trent.
Reverend Michael Metcalf, co-opted member for the Prosperous Staffordshire Scrutiny and Overview Committee, and I'm representing that committee here this morning and will report back to them.
Gillian Pardesi, County Councillor for the Stafford Central Division.
Thank you for that. We'll move into the agenda then. And item 1, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies this morning from Councillor Mrs Perry and also from Cabinet Member Victoria Wilson.
Thank you. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the Safeguarding Committee meeting held on the 19th of July, pages 1 to 8. I trust everyone's had the opportunity that was here to read through them. And any comments, or happy that I signed them off as a true and accurate record? Thank you. Item 4, recommissioning arrangements for domestic abuse contract. I think, David, did you want to make any opening comments?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Yep. So the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being asked to scrutinise the comments and the draft recommendations and the direction of travel outlined within the draft Cabinet report. These are... Within there, the Cabinet report highlights that the existing domestic abuse victim and perpetrator services contract will currently terminate at the end of September 2023 and requests that the funding for the recommissioning of these services is secured. The Cabinet report also recommends these services replicate the current arrangements and will be jointly recommissioned with Stoke-on-Trent City Council together with the Staffordshire Commissioner's Office, and that the level of funding per annum remains at the existing core contract level. The comments of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee were reported to Cabinet at their meeting on 19th of October for them to take into account in their consideration of this matter. Members have got the report in front of them, and I've got two very, very experienced officers by the side of me who will be able to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I just wonder if someone could just take us through the report just briefly.
Thank you, Chair. So if I just take us through the report, I think the report does highlight the current service. In terms of the approach that we've taken, and that contract is into its fourth year, so the first year of the two-year extension. The collaborative approach actually is really meant for the first time that we've had support for victims and their families consistently available. across the whole county, regardless of where they live. So the services have encompass support for victims, families, communities and businesses through a three-tiered provision, including that prevention, early intervention, targeted and acute support. A similar approach was taken for the perpetrator rehabilitation, and that was introduced as a service, a consistent service for the first time in this. Previously, we didn't have any consistent support at all for perpetrators. If we ran a programme, it was ad hoc, which is definitely not a way that we were getting the most effective results. So this has really given us an opportunity to change and rebuild skills and lives of potential and offenders. So the success of how we have worked with the Commissioner's Office and our Stoke City colleagues is a reason for recommending that we recommission the services in the same way. The report does provide some background in what we do. The current service did start in October 2018, and the contract was awarded to victim support for the victim side and to recommending reoffending partnership for the perpetrator side. That was branded together jointly as New Era Services, and that has been running. It finishes at the end of September 2023, and the recommissioning process needs to start shortly to enable us to meet timelines to recommission. I'm sure members will know domestic abuse is a key priority highlighted within every district and borough in the strategic assessments. It's also, as you'll be aware, a national priority. That demand remains high. It's noted that since this service has been running, the demand is up by about 30% on the pre-COVID figures. Members are drawn to item 6 in the report, which shows the actual level of referrals that we have. And there is a confirmation of the overarching governance of how this contract is, oversight for this contract is there. That is through the Domestic Abuse Commission and Delivery Board, jointly chaired by Stoke City and ourselves, and Catherine as Assistant Director and responsible for strategic lead for community safety, co-chairs that group. It is intended that these arrangements that we've had in place continue as we go forward and recommission. In terms of the funding, and I will just refer to the breakdown of the funding in the current contract, of the overall value, the County Council's contribution is 31%, Stokes is 21%, with the remaining 48% being provided by the Commissioner's Office. So just over 2 million a year is the total contribution on the current contract, and it is recommended that we go forward in the same way next year, next contract. In terms of the legal side, we've currently got tripartite agreements that set out that funding arrangement, and it is the intention that we would do that going forward again. So we mirror the existing approach. In terms of resource and value for money, funding for the County Council will provide services solely within the County Council's footprint. The Commissioner's Office funding funds additional resources across Staffordshire, so helps to manage that demand. And clearly the same principle applies for Stokes funding. In June 2019, the Cabinet authorised the signing of those tripartite agreements for both victims and perpetrators, so that confirmed our contribution for the current contract. Then we identify how this links to the strategic plan, and also a community impact assessment is attached to the report. I think that concludes taking members through the report, Chair.
Thank you for that, Do we have any questions? Councillor Burnett.
Can I just ask how we're reaching out to people in the rural areas where there are vulnerable people on sort of like outlying farms and places like that, and they don't engage with us at all, and we don't, half the time we don't even know they're there, and there's lots of abuse that goes on. How can we engage with them and get them involved?
As part of the current arrangements, there is an engagement strategy as part of the contract, and New Era do a lot of communications. They do have outreach workers, so we do try and get out into the local communities. Certainly, we can make sure going forward that that element is again captured in terms of the specification for the contract.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. If my reading of this report is correct, then the funds essentially remain the same going forward, despite the fact that since COVID there's been a 30% increase in numbers. And I just wonder how that's going to stack up. And a related question is to the perpetrator services. If we look at the Staffordshire numbers on page 21 of the pack, it's only 1,200. And that's set against the victim services of 21,000. So in order to prevent, and we don't want to say one for one, because a perpetrator may have abused more than one person, clearly. But it does suggest that all the perpetrators aren't being picked up. And I just wonder, given the financial constraints that are being imposed upon this contract, where the perpetrator numbers sits, because clearly doing something for the perpetrator so they don't do this again is hugely important. So they're related questions, albeit different. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Just to, while Trish is getting the things together, just to remember that perpetrators don't have to engage, which is something that we try to encourage. I used to be the chairman of the Doves Forum for East Staffordshire for some time, and it was very difficult to actually get some perpetrators to admit to, never mind engage with processes. And obviously there are other programs that go on whilst they're in prison, should they go into prison for things like that. So it is a difficult area, but it's not something where perpetrators have to do it. There are some times where I know judges have imposed conditions such as that, but it's not as easy as just one-on-one.
Yeah, and I think when the existing current contract was drawn up, it was recognised that we did need something for perpetrators, but as Councillor Williams says, it isn't statutory. There's no mandatory command on perpetrators to engage, so it is a voluntary thing. However, in terms of our funding, if you like to give you a view of the proportion, out of the 600,000 plus total that we put in, it's round about 100,000 of that goes towards the perpetrator programme. So we're not putting so much funding into the perpetrator programme. There is an emphasis on providing for victims and support for victims. So, it's a 500,000, 100,000 split in terms of proportion that we're providing for.
But is, in lieu of the portfolio holder, are you satisfied that there's enough money in here, given the 30% uptick since COVID?
I think there is certainly demand that if there was further funding available, obviously we would put that funding in, but recognising the wider council and the constraints, then holding it at the volume that we have. Thankfully, it does now look like we're out of COVID. So some of the programmes that we were doing that are more, shall we say, cost effective because you do them as group programmes rather than on a one-to-one, we're now moving more and more back into that. So that will help us dealing with more people. So, you know, people will be able to go through. I think the other thing that we have been able to do in the existing programme is there have been occasions where we have been able to put some more targeted support in by funding from another area. We would look to do that again where that's possible, you know, where you have opportunities to use funds within the domestic abuse area. What this paper doesn't do is request any further money for the core funding.
If I could, Chair, just before, and that it's constantly monitored as well, obviously, and I know that a lot of work goes on around certain issues. So normally around the World Cup, domestic violence can sometimes go an increase, and therefore a lot of work on prevention, and that reassurance is taken there. But also when it comes to the victims, actually making sure victims understand that what has happened to them and for such a long period of time, and trying to ensure that they don't go back into those is really quite important, as well as the perpetrators.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Councillor Wilcox, I think you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just some clarification, please, at the table at number 5, where it talks about the numbers of victim service and perpetrator service. Is that across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, or is that just Staffordshire? And if it, just to follow on from that, if it is just Staffordshire, are Stoke-on-Trent's numbers call on the service greater than the call on the service in Staffordshire, bearing in mind that we give equal amounts of funding into the service? Thank you.
Yeah, just in terms of the table, the first of the columns for the victim service is Pan Staffordshire, so that's including Stoke-on-Trent. The second column is Staffordshire, so for example, victims since the start of the contract through to the 31st of March, 21,800 victims across Stoke and Staffordshire, and then 13,678 across Staffordshire. We fund, the money that we put in from the County Council funds solely County Council area. Stoke's money funds Stoke's area. What happens above that is that the Commissioner's Office funding then is used pan Staffordshire wherever the demand is needed. So all of our funding is supporting the 13,678, and in addition there'll be Commissioner's Office money funding for the Staffordshire area. And for Stoke, their 21% is funding their area, with Commissioner's Office funding going in there for demand. So it's not an exact science, but I'm reassured that everything that the County Council is funding is funding victims and perpetrators, plus considerable additional support from the Commissioner's Office funding.
Thank you, Chair. Just taking that one step further then, so the bit that comes from the Commissioner's Office, 40-odd whatever %, do we know what the breakdown of that is used within Staffordshire and which is used in Stoke-on-Trent? Do we have that sort of data to hand, just to see whether there's an increasing call on their funding for Staffordshire or Stoke-on-Trent?
Yeah. I don't have that to hand. I can ask the lead commissioner at the Commissioner's Office if they're able to provide that and report back.
Thank you then. Councillor Wong.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to push maybe slightly on the funding element. It is the thing that jumped out at me in the report, to see that it was flat essentially from the calculations that were done in 2018. So presumably then we thought in 2018 that this level of funding was the acceptable amount to be dedicated to domestic abuse services in Staffordshire. We're now 5 years, well, we will be 5 years when it comes to the procurement exercise, And as Johnny quite rightly said, we've got the actual referrals going up by 30% pre-COVID. We've got the increase in core costs from providers who, due to inflation, will obviously mean that they're going to take a hit to their budgets. And also there'll be a pressure on their wage bill because their staff will potentially need more in wages to cover the costs of bills and so on. So really what we're saying here is that we're probably reducing the size of that service that we're providing, certainly from Staffordshire's part of it. So I suppose my question is, do we know what other partners are doing? Are they increasing funding or are they keeping it the same? And I think the reality is that if we don't increase the funding, then I think as potentially being acknowledged, that some people who need support across Staffordshire may not get it anymore because we're not putting enough money into the service. And given it's one of our key priorities in the strategic assessment and the key priorities across districts and boroughs, surely isn't it right that this should be given some additional funding? Not a lot, but some, just to ensure that it keeps up with the pressures that the service may face. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that? Okay, thank you. I think it's a really good point made by both yourself and Councillor McMahon, and it is something, you know, bearing in mind your comments, we will look at further. We will also explore what the other partners are putting in, if there is any potential uplift. We do have a Domestic Abuse Commissioning Board on Monday, and it's something that we can raise as part of that board, because I appreciate that while costs are potentially increasing, there are also pressures within the County Council in terms of pound in, pound out, and how we spend our money. But what we wouldn't want is for those victims to go unsupported as part of this piece of work. And it's also then trying to identify if there are any other additional sources of funding. What Trish did highlight is that during COVID, some of those costs did rise disproportionately because of the targeted work that was taking place. But yes, we will take your comments on board. We will do some further work in terms of identifying who else is funding what, if there's going to be an uplift, and if there is any potential to sort of seek any further funding, but bearing in mind that balance between the pressures within the County Council.
Councillor Hookford.
I think the council.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask a couple, or make a couple of points if I could? I think the point that was made several times, one about the funding, the value for money, is it enough? And also about the perpetrators, as it sounds very American, doesn't it? I'm sure in this country we call them offenders. There is a big issue, and I think there is a wealth of evidence out there to suggest that by far the majority of this problem is caused by repeat offenders. And any domestic violence strategy from a previous employment of mine, of course, tries to tackle those repeat offenders. And I think the point that was made earlier about we have 400 but 28,000 offences, I would suggest that perhaps that 400 contain quite a few repeat offenders. And also, I was interested, and I think it follows on from the point about what are other partners doing. I noted with interest that the Commissioner's Office recently talked about adopting a strategy of crime reduction, which I think a lot of forces nationally have moved away from over the years. I think it's encouraging to see that we are moving back to crime reduction strategies. Part of that strategy, an essential part of that strategy is usually is offender management. And I think it does tackle that point where we were told that offenders don't have to agree to any of this, and they're quite right, they don't have to agree to it. But offender management can be quite aggressive in its approach, particularly around repeat offenders. And it would be interesting to see the impact that that has, because most of that would be carried out by the police, of course, in actually reducing this demand. I suppose the overall point for me when I read this report is that we were being asked to agree that this moves forward. And I think there are three tests to it usually. One is about, is there a demand? And I think we've already seen that. And I think most of us would agree that there is a demand. In fact, we're told it's going up by 30%. Usually as well, I think from a perspective of value for money, we really need some assurance that we understand the problem. And actually, is our approach dealing or tackling effectively with what that problem is? I assume that there are other reports, because none of that is hinted at in here, particularly around repeat victims. So I feel slightly concerned that we don't have that reassurance that we understand the fact that where we're spending the money is making the difference. And the final test, of course, is that value for money, is what we're doing having the desired effect. And disappointingly, I suppose, if it's gone up 30%, I know we could probably say most of that was due to COVID and people being forced together. But there also needs surely to be some sort of performance indication built into this that gives us that reassurance that we're spending that money effectively and usefully. I think from what we've heard, there is an essential for us to move forward, and we're asked to examine the direction of travel, I think they call it, and give our blessing for this particular contract to be renewed. I think we all agree that it does need to be renewed. My only concern is that I would have expected, and I do think that we ought to have some better understanding that we're doing the right thing, and also some value for money description, in particular in partnership with the others, particularly again around things like offender management. If the police do that properly, that will greatly reduce the demand, and therefore our money will be spent far more wisely and far more effectively. So I do think there's a contextual understanding that's required in this, and I hope that we could feed that back to Cabinet. But in principle, what we're being asked to do is to reinforce our support, and the money isn't going up. And I'm pretty sure, unless other people want to make any comment, that we're all in favour of doing that for practical reasons.
As nobody's intimated, Chairman, can I just say thank you for the comments in there. I think they both have been taken down. And obviously with the Cabinet member not being here at the moment, these comments will be taken back, fed into the report before it comes before Cabinet. And then we'll be able to make sure. I value the comments you've said, and actually for what everybody said, because it is a very important issue that unfortunately blights everywhere, and nobody is immune to it. No matter what background, it is everywhere. So those comments are really useful, and I think they'll be taken back and placed in the report for Cabinet.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pardeshi.
Yeah, just very quickly, Chair, in terms of understanding the issue, we cannot effectively tackle issues such as domestic abuse without recognising, of course, that it is linked to issues of poverty and housing and inequality. And they need to be addressed hand in hand. Otherwise, we could be in this same spot for years to come. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I have to say, from my understanding, I'm not aware of the evidence that makes those links. And in fact, I think domestic violence blights the lives of people across the spectrum. And I think it is important that we make sure that we provide that service to everyone. Trish, I think you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, if I may, Chair, just to come in on that comment, just to give a reassurance about the current service. And it's very much about forming that more integrated system of support, as you quite rightly pointed out. So the service does, where it needs to, work with specialist providers, so be that drugs, alcohol, mental health services, as well as GPs, both children's social care, adult social care, but also, and really importantly, in a two-tier authority like ourselves, works with housing officers as well as the courts and police to really try and make sure that there's a holistic approach to actually helping domestic abuse victims. So just wanted to give that reassurance. Okay.
Thank you for that. Councillor Williams, thank you for bringing the report. We'll just wait for the choreography of people changing. This is the one where we're going to go into.
So family home is at the very end. It's after.
Right, thank you for that. Item 5 then, Children's Services Transformation 6-month review. Councillor Sutton.
I just wonder if you could just give me 2 seconds just to bring it up on the computer, wherever, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for that. I was trying to do emails and things while I was waiting for the previous item to finish. So one of a number of items have here this morning that I've got the assistance of Natasha Moody, who, as you'll know, is the Assistant Director for Wellbeing and Partnerships, and Nisha, who's the AD for Children's Social Care. For the first item, transformation, colleagues will be aware that we have gone through a transformation process, and it was really important to us that we were able to have a look to see where we are with that, how that is embedding, and if there is any learning from that, and if there is learning, which there is, how we then go about implementing it, and which are the really key important areas that we actually work on. The report details the key findings, as I've said, what is working well, what is could be done better, and how we plan to move forward and do that. Natasha's prepared a presentation which she will go through in a moment, which will take members through the highlights of that report and how we intend to go about looking at those areas that need to develop over the years. So if I can, hand over to Natasha, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine, thank you very much.
Good morning all. So I shall take you through the slides today then. So what we hope to kind of show the committee this morning is an overview of some of the interdependencies that are impacting on Staffordshire that are definitely having an impact in terms of the transformation, so that you're aware of them, but so that you also understand that they are an interdependency and not necessarily as a result of the transformation. To share some of the themes that are emerging as part of the 6-month review, and the Net Promoter Score, which is a survey that was done by HR colleagues earlier this year, which we've kind of used together really to give us a broader kind of context and picture really of how staff are feeling. And then to reflect on the transition plan and obviously seek your feedback as to whether or not you feel assured that the plan is fit for purpose, or we've kind of missed anything as we've gone through that process. So I shall just canter through and then hopefully take questions at the end if that's okay with people. So there are a number of things that are kind of interdependent with the transformation and not necessarily as a direct result of it. And so we've listed these as interdependencies, but they're not necessarily something that we'll address through either this report or the presentation today. So you will obviously just be receiving an overview on the Josh McAllister care review that was launched, and obviously Nish will talk to you about that later. There's definitely an interdependency with that review. Luckily for us, I think we were all kind of waiting with bated breath around whether or not that would fundamentally seek to undermine the work we've been doing as a transformation, and luckily it didn't. So that's positive. There are obviously things that will happen as part of that review which will impact on the transformation. I think all of us across lots of sectors, you know, particularly in the public service, have seen change in workforce trends as we kind of emerge from COVID. I think some of those were expected, some of those we've kind of been building up to for a while, some of them completely unexpected. So I think, you know, staff are wanting, you know, greater flexibility, more work-life balance, being able to be a bit more selective about the jobs and roles that they choose to take. You know, and again, some of that will be picked up in the care review as we look at, you know, the kind of use of agency workers and things like that. But again, it's not necessarily a kind of feature of the review of the transformation. There is a definite trend, and I've included a graph there, which I don't expect you to study in detail. Apologies for the smallness of that. But basically what that's trying to show you is that actually against our statistical neighbours, what does the trend look like in terms of numbers of children coming into care? And what hopefully it does demonstrate, and you'll be able to see, is that actually the number of children coming into care is still rising across all local authorities, and that isn't necessarily as a result of the transformation as such. What you can see, and perhaps not as well as I'd have liked you to be able to, is that actually Staffordshire is still relatively low in terms of its comparator regional colleagues. So actually it does give you some assurance that actually whilst the numbers are increasing, we're not necessarily out of kilter with what other people are seeing, and perhaps, you know, seeing Stoke right at the top there gives you an indication of our nearest neighbour really in terms of the impact of that trend. We're definitely seeing an anecdotal and a real kind of impact of COVID. Both the complexity of needs we think have increased, but also I think some of the absence of face-to-face service delivery for some of our children and young people has definitely had an impact. You know, I can definitely talk with confidence about my own 2 children who are relatively, you know, confident young people before COVID, and actually have kind of really struggled with kind of making the move back to increasing independence. You know, and I took her to Sports Day recently, and she said to me, some of the children in my class had forgotten what Sports Day was, and as a child going into year 5, that just gives you some idea really of the change in their family lives and actually how that's impacted. I'm sure for lots of children who had families who were able to look after them, you know, their experiences were probably a lot different for some of those who had a complex life anyway and were living in sometimes, you know, increasingly chaotic family households that actually weren't necessarily equipped to deal with some of those needs. So I think it would be, you know, unfair and unrealistic of us to say that actually that hasn't had an impact on our children. It absolutely has. And I think what you need to know is that actually the children's transformation made an assumption that actually COVID wouldn't impact on the increased complexity or demands coming into children's social care. And I think what we're telling you is it probably has impacted more than we thought it would. So that's something for you to be aware of. But again, is an interdependency, not necessarily as a result of the transformation as such. So hopefully that just kind of gives you an overview of those things. I'm going to get all technical, if you don't mind, just for a second. So, and I'm going to do my least impressive version, I think, of trying to relay this data to you, because I'm not the technical expert, but I'm going to try my best. So, as a non-technical expert, what I can tell you this data means is that we basically do a kind of survey of staff working across children's services. We do it across the whole organisation, actually, but this is the results from children's services, the last kind of look, which was in June. And we've added this data to the data we collected as part of the transformation review, just to give it a bit broader context and see whether or not the themes that were emerging there were also what was emerging as part of the transformation review. And what this tells you is that actually some of those themes are the same. Now, generally speaking, the score that we get, so that 6.41, has improved. So people are feeling more positive about working in children's services than they were the last time we did this survey. But the people who are feeling negative about it are also feeling more negative. So that's something to bear in mind. And again, you'll see that through some of the results that come through later. So we added the data from this survey from something else we did. So we basically asked all of the staff workforce to think about the transformation, to think about what had gone well, what could be improved, and what were their ideas for how we could improve the things that they'd identified. Now, there's a reason we did that. We're only 6 months in. We're a huge county, and we didn't feel at that particular time it would be right to go out and ask families and communities, or indeed partners, because actually they may not have felt the impact. And again, I'll touch on some of that when we come on to some of the themes that emerged. But it is our intention to do that again, so we will go back next time and ask a broader cohort of people what they thought. By that time, we would hopefully have realised the staffing restructure changes, but also people will have started to feel the benefit of working in this way. So these are the themes that emerged as part of the 6-month review. And again, really simply here, the green stuff is the really good stuff. The yellow stuff is the stuff that people had both a positive and a negative experience of. And the red stuff was the stuff that people identified as being poor or wanting to improve. And the stuff that came out the highest is on the right-hand side. So time, demand, capacity pressures was the one that came out highest. So staff were feeling that above anything else. And flexible and good working environment, they were feeling the least. So that was the least amount of feedback we got in relation to that feedback. So, for example, the staff teams were saying, as a result of the children's transformation, we anticipated a certain number of children coming into care. And actually that number of children coming into care hadn't necessarily been realised. And so what they were saying was the numbers of staff in the service provision might not necessarily be fit for purpose. So again, you'll see it on the solutions later on. One of the things they asked us to do is go back and look at the data and make sure that the staffing structure is fit for purpose based on the data we now had, which I think is a fair kind of reflection of what they wanted us to do. Quite a few of the staff were saying that demand, that kind of extra capacity pressure was impacting on their well-being. And I have to say, it was really interesting to see kind of some of the feedback that came back positively in terms of people were feeling like they were getting something from being physically in an office, from meeting each other, from having that touchdown, that kind of back-at-base conversation. And actually, lots of them were saying in the districts that they were seeing that impacting positively on their well-being because they were taking the time to connect with one another, say hello, how are you, all those general things that we kind of take for granted, really. And so I think what staff were asking for was more opportunities to do things like that, to just connect, to make sure that we're all okay before we even get into business, which I think is a fair ask of our staff to make, really. One of the other things that came out quite loudly was that quite a lot of people were saying, do you know what, I've worked in children's services for a long time, I knew the system before, a lot of stuff had changed as a result of that staffing restructure, and now I'm not quite sure who does what where. How do I start to find the people that I need across that network to make me more efficient in my role? And so, again, that's something we want to pick up as part of the solutions that we've kind of put forward, really. There was a lot of feedback in terms of management support. So a lot of staff said, I feel really well supported by my manager. I feel like I'm able to raise questions when I don't know the answer to stuff. Kind of make sure that they're briefed on stuff, that they've got the time to give me the support I need. But then on the flip side, a lot of people saying, actually, my manager is new to role, they're still learning, they're not necessarily always sure where to go and need some help themselves. So actually that's impacting on me and my ability to be, the best I can be. So that came out kind of like I say, positively and negatively. Lots of people talked really positively about the training and skills development. So they said as an employer, we're really good at offering good training. They were seeing more visibility of lots of training across a broader range of skills. So, for example, somebody who previously worked in SEND might be saying, actually, do you know what, I'm really able to expand the training I receive across a broader wealth of training and skills. So that was impacting positively on them. And they were saying that actually they were really benefiting from being in a peer group with a group of people that didn't necessarily do the same job as them. So, for example, some of the feedback came back, I'm a SEND practitioner and I haven't started the HCP process because I have a better understanding of early help and what that can do to help and support a family earlier on. So there was definite benefits coming from that more informal training and skills development, but also the formal stuff. But the negative thing about that was that people said, actually, you didn't take the time to understand the gaps in my training skills and knowledge, and therefore some of the training that you've put on hasn't necessarily been fit for purpose. So actually, if you're going to do something around training skills and development, you really need to understand the areas that I need to develop. So again, that's something we'll pick up in the proposal moving forward. I'm yet to see anything where communication doesn't come out, and so this will come as no surprise, I don't think, to anybody. People talked a lot about communication in a lot of different ways as well. So some were saying that actually we were having better conversations and having really good conversations and communicating with each other about some things. But actually a lot of people were saying my preferred style isn't necessarily through email. The volume of work that we're getting through, actually emails can get lost, quite easily, and our preferred method of communication is to hear that from my direct line manager or in a team meeting or something like that. And they were saying that actually the kind of consistency of messages across the system had been slower to develop than they expected. So, for example, if I just think about the old kind of team that we used to work in, there wasn't necessarily such a need to think about a whole system way of working. So there's much more of a need for both Nisha, myself and Tim to work collaboratively to understand the impacts across that system and make sure that all of those messages are getting out to all of the staff. So there's still work to do on that. And again, we picked that up as a theme as part of the suggested way forward. And consistency, I don't think that will be a surprise to anybody. So we've previously been in a district model of working, we moved to a central model, and now we've gone back to a district way of working. And this comes up time and time again when we move to a district way of working, that consistency isn't necessarily there. So you'll get one district who's really good at one part of the system, another district who might be really good at something else. So it's about the systems and processes that we have in place to identify that consistency and take action to address some of that. And I know some of the work we've been doing around the learning hubs is definitely starting to see that happen. So it's starting to flush up where that performance or that consistency isn't happening so that we can take action. Lots of people, and I've touched on this, said about better collaborative working. Better collaborative working, I suppose, in terms of both the needs of children and families, coming back to base and having a conversation around actually how does that impact on the child or young person? How can I connect with the people in the office that will make it better for that child or young person to feel the difference? But also in terms of working better collaboratively in a district space. So, for example, lots of the feedback on this one came back to say, actually, I'm physically based in the district hub with the district council and the police and health, and actually we're all having the right kind of conversation in a district place. And so actually people were seeing the benefit of working locally on that local footprint. And a lot of people talked really, really positively about the fact that both as an impact of COVID, but I suppose more generally that we've embraced this way of flexibility, having that good working environment, trying to strike the right balance between being physically in the office and also being allowed to work flexibly, to meet the needs of you as an individual. So lots of people said actually that was coming out really, really positively. There wasn't anyone who said, you know what, I don't feel like you're flexible or provide me with a good working environment, which is positive. And then the themes from the NPS, so the Net Promoter Score survey that I talked about before, kind of reflect the same kind of thing. So they might have come back in terms of different words, but actually the same kind of themes were coming back again. So they were talking about workplace pressures, talking about good benefits, flexible employer, communication. So nothing new really. So I think this did was probably add weight to the findings that we'd already had as part of the transformation, and we thought it would be useful because actually there might be a broader range of people who were included in some of this feedback. So that's why we included it as part of the suggested way forward. So I don't think actually there was anything that caught us there that we thought, you know what, that didn't come out through the feedback we got. And so overall, nearly 300 people have had an opportunity, well, everybody had the opportunity to feedback, but 300 people did take the time to feedback, and actually that's the kind of totality of what they said. And then we really wanted to hear from staff about what they wanted us to do differently. And these were their suggestions. So these are taken directly from the kind of 200 lines of feedback that I've got like sitting behind all of this that say, actually, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And so these are some really practical suggestions from people. So I suppose what this does, is give you some assurance that what people are asking for, they're not necessarily big things. They are asking for us to just have a look at fundamentally a few bits of kind of good practice, really, in terms of having a communication plan, making sure that we've done the skills audit so that the training plan's fit for purpose. They're asking us to focus on staff wellbeing and make sure that we pay attention to the individual that comes in their way. They mentioned some real specifics around actually the way in which people are being referred into for help and support isn't necessarily working for them. So, you know, could we have a look at that? And again, they've just said to us some of the real practical stuff. So, for example, one of the education inclusion officers said to us, actually, my line management is here. This is how it feels for me being line managed in that structure. I still feel I'd benefit from being based in a place and making the connection with that district, but actually I need my kind of subject matter expert to have a relationship with me. So again, they're just asking for tweaks in terms of that management or line management oversight so that we get that relationship with the centre and the districts better. So again, nothing I suppose earth-shattering there, or that kind of fundamentally said, you know what, we don't think this is the right thing, or you need to completely move away from it. So basically, as a result of all of that, we had a conversation as a leadership team, and we decided that the best way forward would be to look independently at the feedback. So as I say, there's kind of over 200 lines of kind of specific feedback that sits underneath this. To provide, to have a look at your structure based on some of that feedback. So where people were saying, actually, my line management would be better coming from a different person, we asked people to go away and have a look at that. And also have a conversation within teams to make sure that actually, does the structure feel like it's fit for purpose? So everybody's been asked to bring that structural change back. I don't think they'll be significantly different. I think, you know, the people might be asking, for example, for one more of something, or, you know, for us to change the line management responsibility. They're not necessarily saying anything significant, really. And then we said, actually, let's bring that back together. Let's try and knit it back together because of that interdependence, so because of the fact that we're so connected now as a system. And then let's try and prioritise 3 areas of work. And the reason for this was because staff said, so much in the system has changed that actually you need to prioritise the things that you absolutely want us to do first. So the things that came back most from a kind of staff's perspective was the workforce pressures, the way in which we work, and the communication and engagement. So we said, right, those are the 3 things that we think we need to prioritise. That's not to say we won't do the other things, but we think we need to tick those off first before we start to move on to other things to give some sense of, again, that prioritisation for staff. And one of the things that we definitely need to do is thank people for their time and kind of making sure that they get the feedback from this. So we've done some videos that have gone out to staff teams on this presentation. You know, we've kind of made sure that managers are thanking the teams for their participation in it so that they know that their contribution is kind of valued by us all. And so I'm just going to rattle through, if I can, the themes that we want to cover off in those kind of task and finish groups. So these reflect the themes that came up in terms of the areas that staff asked us to focus on. So workforce is the first task and finish group. Those are the themes that they'll concentrate on there. Again, all of those were listed as part of the solutions that staff had come up with. Ways of working. So this is really about actually how do some of the systems and processes support us. So one of the changes we made that was quite significant was the move of the resource of business administration into the best team. And again, they want to make sure that that process is fit for purpose and working as it should be. Definitely something around the interface between central and district functions and how they work effectively together. A review of how people access help and support. And again, we'll touch on the family hubs later, but how the family hubs play a role in that kind of process. And then a review in terms of some of the processes, so the panels work, for example. And then communication and engagement came up, like I say, really loudly from staff's perspective. And so we need to have a really coherent approach to this. And, you know, I'm sure anybody who has kind of lived or worked or ever knows that kind of you can't over-communicate, can you? So I think there is a massive piece of work to do on making sure that all staff are getting the messages in lots of different ways to make sure that they understood, you know, they understand where we're at, really. And so that's how it'll be structured. So we said that we absolutely wanted to make sure that there was that ownership and oversight from Neelam as the Director of Children's Services, and that me, Nisha and Tim needed to play a role in leading that work. So Nisha will be looking after the workforce one, I'll be looking after the ways of working, and Tim's looking after the comms and engagement. And hopefully, again, that gives you some kind of buy-in really from us as senior leaders that we're committed to making a difference based on the feedback from staff within the teams. And that's it. Over to you for any questions, thoughts or reflections.
Oh, thank you for that quite a comprehensive run-through. Do we have any questions? Councillor Burnett.
Do we have a full cohort of social workers at the moment, or have we still got vacancies? Do we know?
So we haven't got a full cohort of social workers, nor have most local authorities across the region, so it's not a surprise that we haven't. Again, we talked about consistency, so we've got different gaps in different districts. So for example, in Newcastle, we've got no vacancies. And then in some districts like East Staffs, we're struggling with social workers, and we've got 13.5 vacancies. 13 are covered by agency staff. So there aren't necessarily the gaps because we're covering those with agency workers, but there are definitely pressures in some districts more than others.
So are we still looking to fill those gaps and advertising? And
Yeah, so there's an ongoing advertising campaign. I don't think it ever stops, to be quite frank. And it's something that we're working regionally with on in terms of the recruitment of social workers. So yeah, it's absolutely something we're doing something about. Again, it comes up in the care review, which again we'll touch on later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I just, to sum up really for me, just going through the report and hearing your description of it, I think we need to remember that this is it's a 6-monthly review, isn't it? This isn't the finished product, so to speak. And it strikes me that what we are trying to do as a council is hugely ambitious in that significant change process. I think it was really encouraging to see that when we look at that level of demand, that we're at the bottom of that. And actually, there didn't seem to be any big changes in that demand as there were on some of those local authorities. Clearly, something happened in 2020 which seems to have affected quite a few local authorities. There's obviously the understandable issues around COVID. But I think I was particularly pleased and impressed with the results of that survey, because I think that significant change generally means a cultural change in an organisation, and I think we perhaps all understand just how difficult it is to achieve that sort of cultural change to make it happen. I was particularly grateful as well for the sort of candid assessment of where you think that we are, highlighting the difficulties as well as where we've made some of those improvements. And again, as I was particularly impressed with that, I think that was really useful to have that sort of honest interpretation of where we are after 6 months. I think that bit about management support, communication and consistency does seem to be the areas that we need to improve on, but I suppose you would expect that certainly only 6 months in. And also I think it was impressive that when we speak to staff and ask them what they want, their wants are relatively realistic and small and positive, which again I think is a reinforcement of perhaps the success of this transformation process. So I think all in all, given the fact that we're only 6 months in, we were looking for considerable change, and as I say, change in the culture of an organisation, which is always difficult to achieve. I think that was very impressive, and I think we're obviously on the right track. I think this process is transformational in itself, and I was very impressed with that, so thank you very much. I think Councillor Wilcox, you wanted to make a point.
Thank you, Chairman. Not to put a damper on the whole situation, but I'm impressed with the feedback from the surveys of the staff, which is brilliant. But the implementation, the action plan is massive. And I just wonder, whilst you're doing all that, who's doing the day job? And if some of the things I picked up in the report where it talks about insufficient staff capacity, visibility on processes, practitioners not on the same system, challenging workloads, the one bit about early signs, sharing practices, we've always said all along the communication piece is really important in all of this, that we get that right. And then we talked about staff not wanting necessarily to have emails, work-life balance. And then on the other hand, you talk about them actually having conversations with their line managers face-to-face. So I just wondered, some of the challenges I would say is, have we got enough people in the building to begin with? Are we having too many people who are not here that we can't communicate with? And if they're not here, how do we communicate with them if we're not able to use email processes? The action plan, what's the time scale? When do you hope to put a lot of this in place? Because looking at it, it seems more like a 12-month action plan rather than that can be conducted in a short period of time. And then when we looked at the graph earlier on, it showed all the other authorities. Some of them seem to be doing really well or seem to have a downward trend. I think, if I've got it right, I think it was either, was it Herefordshire, Wolverhampton, look as though their trend is coming down. Have we contacted them to see what are they doing differently to the rest of the authorities that perhaps we could learn from? And then finally, with the work that the district's doing, is there any more or is there any training that we could have as members that could sort of help with the situation, given the fact that the workload is so great? Is there anything that we could do to help with that? And on the other one, of course, is capacity, and how do we encourage more people to come work for us in this very challenging environment? So, all in all, Mr. Chairman, positive that we've had the feedback. I'm just concerned that the action plan will take people away from the actual day job that we're trying to get them to do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. Councillor Sutton.
Yeah, thank you for those points. There was a fair few points there. So I'll try and address some of them before Natasha says her bit, particularly around timescales. I think you're absolutely right when it comes to deciding on what we do about this, is that we don't spend too much time trying to do all the tiny little things, but then sometimes some of the smaller things are what really matter to staff, and they are quite easy and straightforward to do. So I think there's an absolute balance. What we don't have within this is, and that's why we have to be, I think, really mindful about going forward and looking at any substantial change. And I think the plan's got to be around embedding the transformation, embedding the district model, and doing those smaller things that staff want. It's what the impact this has had on families and children, and that to me is what staff say is really important, but ultimately we're here to try and improve the lives for children within the county. And feedback from families will be important, and also from partners as well. So I don't think this can be just dealt with in isolation. It's the whole thing, but it'll take a little bit of time before we get that feedback. Talking about recruitment and having sufficient staff, well, I don't think there's probably no organisation in this country at this moment in time that's not suffering from inability to be able to get staff. We have, and Anisha potentially can speak about this better than myself, is that this month, September, we have a cohort of newer social workers just joining us, but they will not be able to have such a high caseload because they have to be supervised. But they'll start to get embedded and move forward, because we have very little problem recruiting new social workers. We can get the pick of those. It's able to keep social workers later on in their service when they want to move about or go to be agency, because they like they want that flexibility of being able to the flexibility that working for an agency brings. So there are absolute challenges there. And overall, I think there's two things that have impacted more than anybody ever thought they would. And when we started transformation, nobody had heard the word COVID, let alone understand what the impact on it. I think the impact of COVID, particularly around that sort of young people, children and young people, being able to be with their peers and friends and make new friends, and what comes with going to school, being able to go out, go to the park, play with their peers, and all that. I don't think the value of that can be underestimated enough, and I think that is a big impact of COVID. And the other thing with actual transformation and way the council operate, you know, this is probably the largest transformation that this local authority has ever done, is the impact of the amount of staff who took the opportunity to leave, take redundancy. And with that goes more skills than we thought would happen. But because of the HR process and the way you go through, it gives those staff the opportunity to see and so we lost more experience than we thought we would probably live. Now the advantage of that, it gives people with the right skill base the ability to move up, to raise to the challenge. But of course, there needs some training that goes along with that. So I think that has impacted on us as well. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add to that, Natasha or Nick.
I suppose there's a couple of things. So in terms of have we spoken to other local authorities? Yes, we have. Some of it I take with a pinch of salt. So, for example, some of the local authorities there that have got a downward trend are inadequate. So you wouldn't necessarily want to be following in their footprints. But we did a lot of engagement with those local authorities before we entered into the transformation to understand what were they doing that was making them so successful. And that's some of what we've modelled the transformation on. So you would like to think that over time, given the right stability in the system, that actually we would start to see some of that happening here. And that's definitely the aspiration and definitely part of the conversations we've had. In terms of the demand, have we got enough bums on seats and as it were, we absolutely, there are some areas where we haven't quite got it right, I think. So, for example, I think if we looked at the data now and we did it on what's actually happening in the system, we might need one or two more of something in our district that we haven't necessarily got, and it's in the wrong place. So it's just in the wrong part of the system. So I think there's some movement that's needed. And there are some things that have changed. So, for example, in education inclusion, the legislation's changed and the ask of the education inclusion officers is completely different now than it was when we started the transformation. So there might be a need for some more of those people in the system. So that is something we should be continually doing. I think what I would say is the aspiration of this system as part of the transformation was for us to continually learn and develop. And so that is part of a learning system. That is part of us kind of doing all of this, reflecting on it, seeing have we done the right thing, and then going back and tweaking and changing some of that. So I would envisage some of that it is actually impacted on as a result of some of the work that we're going to embark upon. In terms of the plan, I think it's a 12-month plan. The reason for bringing it today is to start the conversation and seek your assurances that actually you feel like we're moving in the right direction. And if you are, the plan is to set those working groups up and start the work. And the first plan, the first part of that plan will be understanding, well, what are the key milestones? And I would say anecdotally, from looking at the work that I know I've got to do, I think it is a 12-month plan. And I think by then you would anticipate, like you say, there would be much more stability and much more distance travelled in terms of some of that cultural change, which we know will take time to achieve. So I would say, if you were looking back in another 12 months, you would want to see actually we've started to make some of that traction in terms of both the planning but also that cultural shift that we want to see.
Councillor Wilcox, you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks for that. In relation to the 12-month plan, would it be possible then that we perhaps see a copy of that and perhaps have a quarterly update as to how the plan is progressing, as to whether we're making improvements? Because, as a portfolio member rightly says, this is about making sure that we're doing the right thing for our children and etc. So we want to make sure that the plan doesn't overtake the work that we're trying to do and the work that's ongoing that needs to be done as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Councillor McMahon.
Two very brief comments rather than questions. The first is that I think the staff feedback really shows that people yearn for social proximity. and not social distancing. That social distancing is damaging. And I think that's something that the Cabinet as a whole need to hear. The second point is that there's no organisational system that's perfect, and the pursuit of perfection is the enemy of the good. We know that. The risk, I think, going forward here is that there's a risk of geographical silos. That and that each, I just get that sense reading it, and therefore we've got to be careful that that each area learns from each other. It's interesting they felt more comfortable in their own group, and yet felt the dynamic with the system as a network as a whole was not as good as it could be. Therefore, in my mind, that's the thing you've got to be careful of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eagland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that report. When we had our pre-meeting, after reading this, I thought this would be better if we had individual questions, but the report covers everything that I wanted to ask, except for a couple of things. Councillor Wilcox has already asked many questions that I had. I've got a couple more that you didn't seem to think I, as a long-standing councillor, have taken part in task and finish groups. You're going on this as a 6-monthly period. I know from experience these task and finish groups can turn into a talking shop. And when the report comes to be written down, it takes more time than anyone anticipated. So I would look at that, personally, I would look at that and give yourself a time limit on the group and the writing up of the results from it. And yeah, I was worried about the amount of, I'm glad to hear that you're doing a one-to-one with the people, which is what we are all about. This is the only way we get to know our children and their problems, by being face-to-face and one-to-one with them. But I'm very concerned about, while all this is going on, that we don't neglect the people on the ground floor, our children. It's all very important. We get this from our staff, and we're very welcome to hear it. It's very welcome to hear it. But I do think we've got to keep in mind that the reason we're doing this job is for the people, our children out there. So I would accentuate that it's essential that you don't lose this, what you've already got with the children, and you lose it through going through this for the next 6 months. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Natasha Moody.
I suppose the one thing I would say is I think that's one of the reasons for not wanting to disrupt things too much, because actually what we were starting to hear as part of that feedback is very much that actually this was beneficial from the perspective of the child, the young person and the family themselves, that actually being better connected to that place, having the networks of support within that broader partnership response was actually having an impact, and actually seeing all aspects of children's services working together better in a place was starting to have benefits for children earlier on, particularly those that might sometimes come into the top end of the system, actually benefiting from some of that early help support. So I think that is very much at the forefront of why we want to continue the way we are, address some of those issues that actually have come out, but actually make sure that we don't lose sight of that very thing. So that will principally be in the forefront of both mine, Nisha's and Tim's minds when we're doing some of this work. So
perhaps we could have a quarterly report, or it's already been asked, but maybe we could, you could ask for that, Chair.
I think that's already been agreed, isn't it? I think, Councillor Sutton.
What I would say, I'd be, I'm very happy for the team to provide a written report prepared around what framework is developed, so members can see it. What I would try and resist is just coming back every 3 months like this to give an update, because doing this takes preparation time and what have you. And I just think every 3 months to come back would be too regular. But by all means, committed to have sight of the framework that we develop and where we are on different areas, and then come back in 12 months, by which time we would have an idea of what the feedback from the people, for the children and families out there, and partners, and things like that. And if I could just address Johnny's point around silo working, and this is a difficult thing, isn't it? Is that you could argue that previously one of the reasons we introduced transformation around a district model is so that in the district, those teams from when we first start, say, early help working with a family until the very end of that child's journey, if unfortunately they end up having to be in care, is all dealt with in one place. So the amount of handovers is reduced. Teams are there together and can talk to each other about individual families and children. But I take the point that team as a whole in a district could be seen as in a silo, but previously you could argue that we had silo working with all those teams working independently. So you have silos around functions as opposed to silos, and I personally think the advantages of being within the district, as long as there is overview to ensure good practice, consistency is there, and we don't allow all 8 districts to just go off on their own thing, which we absolutely won't. There are things in place to make sure that doesn't happen. And I don't know whether, if you mind, Mr. Chairman, whether Nisha can talk a little bit around that district model, just a little bit, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you. So in terms of preventing silo working, that the model, the way we have, like Mark explained, within district there are very few handover points, and there is one district lead which makes sure that work progresses seamlessly for children from early help through to our children in care services, so it progresses seamlessly. Within districts, we don't want to have silo working, that one district is doing exceptionally well whereas the other one isn't. And we have got measures in place. We have got one head of district strategy and delivery. We have a robust performance management system through which we make sure that each district is performing at an optimum level, and where there are issues, where do identify issues, that we all help each other, learn from each other. How has one solved and the other hasn't? So we learn from each other and we make sure that we are improving the offer of services to children and families across the local authority. Then we also have support from a cabinet member, from our SDLs, who help coordinate plans and meetings with the councillors, with other partnerships within each district. So we are trying to, we do realise that there is a potential that it could, but we have got measures in place to ensure that every district, every child and family within their district receive a good quality of care, and across Staffordshire they receive a good quality of care and services. There's another point, it was raised twice about if everybody is doing this work, then who is doing the day job? And just want to reassure, and there is another paper that is coming through which is about Ofsted Feedback. 6-month review happened in May, and it was around the same time that Ofsted visited us for our focused visit, and they looked at the most high pressure areas around child in need and child protection, and their feedback is as a testament to say that the day job is progressing and people are feeling the pressure, the workforce is feeling the pressure, because we are trying to, the delivery of services to children and families is not being compromised because of the fact that a new model is still embedding. So we are working through and making sure our staff, their well-being is maintained. And like Councillor McMahon mentioned, it's about people seeking proximity, and that's absolutely spot on. And that's what we're doing. We are having our team meetings face-to-face. But at the same time, transformation, it was the vision of the transformation, and we, as senior leadership, we agree with that. We treat people as adults. We have given them the freedom and flexibility to choose where they work from. The deliverable is that the services to children and families should not be compromised at any stage. And we are keeping an eye through our QA and performance framework. And we meet very, very regularly. I mean, we have a district lead sitting behind me, and they will say, we meet very regularly to make sure that where there are gaps, if there are any pressure points, that we are able to help and support each other to solve those pressure points, make sure services are not compromised.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wildman.
I'll keep this very brief. I've been very quiet because the bottom line is the detail within that presentation was excellent, right? So sometimes you come to a report, you read a report and you think, it's missing some detail. The last one was potentially missing some detail. This was really, really excellent. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And it's really nice to see that we're being open and transparent with the challenges that we face. And I genuinely feel that we will get a grasp of some of the challenges. So thank you.
Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chairman. Not wanting to add any more to your workload because you clearly got enough here to do, but I do think we don't need to every quarter have you coming back to us and reporting where we are, but I think we do need to know as a committee the progress has been made on the 3 action plans, because if anything, if the staff have identified these are the areas of concerns, then I think you at least would want to see some sort of measures that could be shared with us so that we can see that they're going in the right direction, because my fear is if we wait 12 months and then come back and say, well, actually, we didn't do this and we didn't do that, I think we failed our employees over that 12-month period, that we've not addressed the issues they had. So not wanting to add or any full report, but just a briefing, just, half an A4, just saying, this is what we've done in the 3 areas, this is the progress we've made, so that we can feel assured that the action plans that you're putting in place and all the good work that you're doing is actually that we can recognise it and go forward. And then finally, on the district lead bit, what is the method of communication between the districts then to make sure that practices are being shared across the district areas? Do they meet regularly or what?
So we have a weekly meeting of all district leads with their head of district strategy and delivery, whereby they discuss all sorts of issues and problem solve. And then I meet with all the district leads, all my direct reports and their direct reports, which is district leads, once every month, whereby we share good practice, we discuss we have difficult conversations, and we find solutions and agree a way forward. Then I also meet with all my managers across the service once every quarter, whereby we try and share good practice, celebrate success, but also deal with issues.
Thank you for that. I think on the subject of updating, I wonder if members agreed, if I was to take that up with the cabinet member and come back with a proposal about what that should look like, because I think there is a balance to be had about it becoming too burdensome in itself, and we've already made the point about taking the workforce away from the day job, but there's also that understandable need, and I think it's been expressed several times, to have an understanding of where we are in this process. So if members are in agreement, then I'll take that up outside this meeting, and we'll come up with a proposal about what that looks like, so it meets all of the balances around that. Councillor Eagland, I think you indicated.
I didn't want to speak. I was just indicating that I agree with what you've just said. It is a bit much to ask for a quarterly report. I realise that, but we do need, as overview and scrutiny committees, we do need to be reassured that things are going well, or if you've got any problems. Thank you.
Now, I also think, and I said it right at the beginning, and it's been echoed by Councillor Wildman, that the report is unusual in the fact it's quite candid and open and transparent, and we thank you for that. I'm sure you wouldn't have had half the questions if you hadn't have been quite as open and candid. So I think that's that's what happens. So, but I do think I'll go back to the fact that this is a 6-monthly review. What we're trying to achieve is huge. It's about culture change. Yes, there's work to still be done, but I think we're all agreeing that we're making tremendous progress with that. And we'll look forward to see how that goes as time goes on. Does anyone else want to? No. Thank you again. We've already heard part of it, but the Ofsted focus visit, improvement action plan. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you've just said, we've already touched on this a little bit. Late in May, 26th and 27th of May, we had a focused visit Ofsted, specifically to look at our arrangements for children subject to child in need and child protection planning. And that was our first visit since 2019. And the inspection findings were largely positive, stating that children in need of help and protection receive services that respond to their needs, risk is managed effectively, children are visited and trusting relationships built with the practitioners, and there is effective partnership working. There are areas identified for improvement that we are working on. The quality of case supervision records to ensure a consistent focus on planning for all children. The maintaining of timely records on children's case files to accurately reflect the child's experiences, and the effectiveness of our audit process to improve outcomes for children. And the details of our improvement plan are there detailed in the report. Nisha will be able to answer any questions. I don't know whether Nisha's got anything she wants to add before we go into any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Not much to add, because it was a focused visit and we don't get an outcome at the end of a focused visit. So we had the feedback, which was quite reassuring, because there was nothing that we didn't know that Ofsted could tell us. And the fact that you will see that the plan is quite brief that has come out of the visit and recommendations. A couple of them have already been actioned, and others we already were on course to address those before Ofsted came. So yes, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon.
It's a comment on the quality of the records piece, because actually this is a two-edged sword. This not only does it give good quality of care to the children through when other partners are involved in dealing with them, but it's the safety net for the professionals. And again in my previous life, I saw inadequate notes that got practitioners into trouble. And given the fact that we've been talking a lot about the morale of social workers and all the rest of it, it's for their benefit, albeit time-consuming and irritating to have to keep going back to them and updating them, as well as for the benefit of the child. And I just think it needs to be emphasised. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
So in terms of the quality of records, of supervision records, it was an interesting one and a good discussion we had with Ofsted, because what Ofsted could see was that there was good management oversight and support, and our staff reiterated that with Ofsted when they spoke to them, because people do have high caseloads, but the level of work that is happening, they could see the impact of that work on ground for children and families. They could see the impact of partnership working. Perhaps this, and I want it to be read in that way, because what Ofsted was saying is you're doing an injustice to yourself, disservice to yourself, because you're not evidencing it in your written paperwork. And I take your point, Councillor McMahon, because that's the conversation I had with my managers, that we must always think about when that child comes back to read their file 20, 30 years down the line, they should be able to see how a decision was reached in the way it was reached. And I think our managers are trying their utmost, but we must remember that we are dealing with a set of new managers who are in the process of, they are being trained, but you also need a level of experience to get there. And we are, as the transformation embeds and as these conversations, we have more and more of these, they all learn and grow. We have devised a template with which we expect managers to follow when they are putting the key decisions on the file. But I think what was really clear when I had those conversations with my managers and had that feedback was the fact that it's not for anybody else, it's for that child. When the child comes back 20 years later, they should be able to follow that decision making. So the work is happening on the ground. We need to just make sure we evidence that in our written work.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, excellent report, and really good to see that, progress has been made, so, well done that. One of the areas it talked about improvement was the ensure appropriate caseloads. And when I was looking at the actual improvement plan, I didn't see that mentioned anywhere. Is that something that, have we had situations where either due capacity or staffing, the caseload can be sort of an overload on particular social workers who tend to get more caseloads than others, or is that something sort of, is there a best practice that you're trying to work towards in relation to the caseloads? Thank you, Chairman.
So, thank you, Councillor Wilcox. The caseloads, if I'm comparing, because we've talked about the issues around social workers within region and nationally, a national review talks about a national shortage of professionals. In Staffordshire, when I compare with our regional neighbours, the caseloads, I wouldn't say they are as high as some of our neighbours are, but they are indeed high, and higher than what we promised our workers during transformation. But where caseloads are high, and Ofsted asks those questions to our workers, those workers, we make sure that they are particularly supported to make sense so that they can see the wood for the trees. And sometimes we have large family groups. So when you count a caseload, you count each child. But when you're working with families. So, and within those families, we need to make sure we apply a restorative approach whilst working with each child so that we understand their needs. So when we see higher caseloads, sometimes they have a group of children who require closure, but because of pressures of time, they're not able to, and sometimes they have larger family groups. So if you've got 2 sets of 7 siblings, you've crossed your caseload. So yeah, we keep an eye on those.
Thank you for that. Again, I think a very positive report. Clearly, some work still needs to be done. I think the point that was expressed about record keeping, it's always a shame, isn't it, when people make the right decisions but perhaps don't always record them in the right way, that we sometimes let ourselves down. But it sounds from your reply that we're well aware of that and there's training around that, so hopefully that will improve. Again, thank you. Thank you for bringing the report and explaining and answering the questions. We'll move on then to item 7, independent review of children social care, the McAllister report. Councillor Sutton.
So if any member of the committee would like to have a look at the report, it's available on the web, and it's quite a meaty, detailed document. It came out at almost the same time as the report, the national panels into the deaths of Arthur Labinjo Hughes and Star Hobson that members will have seen on the television and the news around about the same time. And I think it's important that this report is looked at together with how we have been doing transformation and what we want to achieve and our aims and ambitions from transformation, and to see how the two things can be interlinked. Now, of course, this is just an independent review, and it is not a white paper or a green paper, or give us any idea of what government going forward would want to try and achieve. So I think the importance of this is because McAllister went round lots of local authorities, spoke to lots of people, took feedback from lots of organisations, and within my role on the LGA, on the National Children and Young People's Board, the LGA were asked for input into it as well. So it's not just been a standalone document that one individual has written because that's what he felt should happen. But so there might be recommendations in there, but we don't know how they will be taken forward. So I think this is a useful document to consider as we go forward to look at what might be good practice, best practice, and how it also links into the review and the report into SEND, and also the white paper on education as well going forward. So I'm sure Nisha and ourselves will try and answer any particular questions that you might have on how basically us in Staffordshire utilise what's in that report going forward.
Thank you for that. Any questions? I suppose when I read the report, Mark, and it talks in here as well, and it concentrates on this systems approach, doesn't it? That's what it's all about. And the fact that sadly sometimes the system breaks down and someone somewhere doesn't quite do what they're supposed to have done, and then these things happen on that unfortunate regularity that that we see these cases come up. We've spent a lot for the last hour and a half here this morning about our own systems and processes, and I think we have some reassurance from that it is something that is the focus of our attention and comes under the microscope quite often. I suppose my question from the McAllister report is where do you think we are with those systems at the moment? I mean, there will always be work to be done, but can we have reassurance and confidence that all things being equal, and I know we can never say never, but that we are relatively happy that the systems work well here in Staffordshire?
Yeah, perhaps start on that, Mr. Chairman, and then Nisha can sort of take over. I think I'm as satisfied as and can be reasonably satisfied that going forward, what we're doing about transformation and the systems we're putting in place, and our wish and our realisation that what we have is not perfect, and will always need to be reviewed. But what I would say about transformation and what's indicated a lot in the review of children's social care is a culture, a way of working, and what we're trying to achieve about working with families and children, and trying to do that with our partners to ensure that we can work as early with children as we reasonably possibly can, to try and keep families together and keep children out of social care, and particularly out of being in care. So to me, it's more a way of working as opposed to just a system, just getting all the processes right. It's how that system works together. Because I think we've suffered, and we do suffer, don't we, when there's a national case review that makes the press. There's been in the past, I feel, too much emphasis on just making sure that a list of have you done this, have you done that, have you done that is complied with. And I understand why that comes out, as opposed to the overall culture. Are we doing our best to try and keep that child and those children safe? And there's a balance, because you do need systems, particularly around partners, different agencies working together, transferring information, bringing things that one agency sees to the attention of others, so that we don't miss out on those opportunities, because so many of those cases that we all read about go around missed opportunities. And I do think the Staffordshire Children Safeguarding Board for Children, has got that all-encompassing remit to try and ensure that across the board, all those different parts do come together like that. So, in summary, I think we have to be careful about not just thinking processes, and policies will prevent any child suffering. It's also about that culture and the way we work.
Yep. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Nisha.
So just to add to what Councillor Sutton said, when me and my DCS, when we are looking at the McAllister report and the National Panel report, Basically, fundamentally, they are looking at better partnership working. They are looking at identifying ways of keeping children safe within families and communities, which will be, I think the McAllister report is recommending some financial support from the government to make this possible. And we in Staffordshire already, with this, the model that we have within district, it is focused on partnership working, creating that multi-agency partnership within districts which works better for our communities. So we've started on that journey. There is a long way to go. The early help strategy will be coming soon, unless it has already come here for scrutiny, which is also looking at embedding that partnership working to make sure families are supported at the earliest opportunity. Through safeguarding partnership, we are keeping an eye on the partnership working with a focus on impact. Up until now, we have made sure our policies, our vision, our priorities are aligned with each other. But there is another step, that every action should create an impact, and that is again something that we are focusing on. So it is a journey, we are on it, but the transformation, the model, the vision that we have is very much in line with what the National Review is suggesting. It's about waiting and watching where government support and funding is aligned so that we can align our processes and systems. The restorative approach that we have and we've embedded across the partnership is again going to help us in keeping families together and out of the care system and supported within communities. So we do feel quite positive about whatever is to come once we have a formal response from the government, and we should be able to move in the right direction.
Yes, thank you for that. I think obviously any funding in this area is always welcome. But quite often when these cases come to light, they usually quote 2 or 3 professionals who could have acted and failed to act. And it is about, again, I was encouraged to hear you talk about the improved partnership working. And some of that isn't about money, is it? It is about sharing information. It's about acting, doing the right thing at the right time. It's about making referrals. It's about feeling comfortable in making those, knowing who to make them to, knowing what happens with them, that encouragement of people sometimes putting their head above the parapet to spot something that they don't like the look of, and rather than think, oh, well, I won't create any waves, actually doing something positive about that. And I was encouraged, and Councillor Sutton was talking about that sort of culture change, because that's precisely what it is, isn't it? So I suppose the McAllister report for me is just a general encouragement that are all of the partners committed in the same way? Is there that culture that we can stand up if we're a local GP? And I know we've had an unfortunate case here previously where some young people missed, was it dental appointments or doctor's appointments, and then they were removed from the list. And I think that they are those little things and those little red flags that we all hope that people will spot. But it is that cultural change that Councillor Sutton was talking about. So it sounds like we're going in the right direction. It sounds like our systems are constantly under focus. It's just, do we have that commitment from partner agencies as well to make sure that they are, I'm sure they're going to say they are as committed to it as we are, but do we see evidence of that? Do we see that there is a cultural change around putting the children of this borough first when we suspect that there might be something untoward?
I do see that commitment from the partnership. There are some very crunchy conversations that we enter into our partner safeguarding board, but I feel that is a good thing that we are able to challenge and come to a conclusion towards the end of it, because that's the sign of a healthy partnership. But yes.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Thank you again. Another really encouraging report, and thank you for bringing. And the work programme.
Chair. Yes, so very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time, we've got the next meeting is on October. That's an extra meeting that we put in specifically to look at the community safety in the Fishmonger Hall incident and the impact for Staffordshire, and also looking at the County Council's role as part of Prevent. So that's October. The meeting after that is on the 24th of November, and at the conclusion of that meeting we've organised an informal work programme planning session as well. The Chairman and Vice Chairman have got a triangulation meeting with Cabinet members and key officers this afternoon, and so the information from that will then help inform the work programme planning at the end of the 24th of November meeting. Okay.
Thank you. Any comments on the work programme? No? We'll move on then to item 9, family hubs in Staffordshire. I'm told there is a public and a closed session or part to this, so Councillor Simpson, did you want to open or Natasha to do it?
No, I can. I can open, no problem, Mr. Chairman. This is paper on how we in Staffordshire are looking to develop family hubs, and as like the first item that Natasha delivered, she's done a PowerPoint to take members through how we intend to try and develop. I think there's a couple of points to note. Is that family hubs for us won't necessarily just be a physical building, because the rurality of the county, that's not something that we could possibly do, is have a family hub in reasonable walking distance of all our communities, and that we have not been successful in obtaining any additional finances from the government to be able to implement a family hub model. So this is very much within our current resources and financial envelope that we are putting this together. So I think the easiest thing to do is just to let Natasha go through the presentation.
Okay, so hopefully you'll have all had a chance to read the report, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the detail, but I just wanted to kind of highlight a few things really. So family hubs are something that the Conservative government pledged to deliver a number of years ago, and really see us bringing together services that have got children at the heart of them, so for those 0 to 19 or 25 with a special educational need and disability, together to make sure that early help is as effective as it can be. And really the family hub is not necessarily about the physical place, the building. It's about a way of working, so it's much more about how do we work coherently together as a group of people wrapped around a family through a place where necessary, but actually make sure that people have got means to access that help and support more broadly. And so actually what we've included within the paper, and hopefully you'll have had the chance to look at, is a list of some buildings that will absolutely form part of that family hub network. But fundamentally this is about changing the way we as a group of partners kind of work in the best interest of children and families. And I saw a really good example of a local authority that have kind of done some of this work, except called it something different. And basically every group of professionals that works with that family operates under the banner of the family hub. And so whilst they might work for MPFT or for Staffordshire County Council or whoever else, actually they're seen as a coherent group of people that are acting on behalf of that family hub. So I would say that's very much the ambition of this kind of paper really, in terms of trying to make sure that we're working as a cohesive system. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of seek support kind of organisationally for us moving in this direction, but also to kind of give you an indication of where it is we're trying to get to. But this is very much the starter for this conversation. So we are actively talking with partners to try and understand how they might contribute towards the family hub, what it might look like from their perspective, how there are opportunities to maybe think more collaboratively and in a partnership arena around the way in which we train our workforces, the way in which we co-locate some of our services and support. So this is by no means something that we're going to accomplish within the next 12 to 18 months. It's a much more longer term vision really for how we want to work for our families. And so hopefully you'll have seen from the report that the main focus of the Family Hub is about a single point of access. So there are kind of three principal things that underpin a Family Hub: relationships, connection, and the single point of access. So it's basically trying to make sure that lots of feedback that we've had, and we definitely see it here in Staffordshire, is that actually sometimes it's difficult to navigate the system of support. There are lots of services that might be out there that are available for families, but actually when I search for the thing that I'm looking for, it's not completely easy to understand how I navigate some of that system of support. That actually you might go looking for something and you might find yourself kind of knocking on multiple doors for accessing some of that support and actually get turned away. And so really this is about saying, how do we take that information, get families referred into the Family Hub where they have a central team that kind of look at those referrals and triage it so that they get to the right place, so that you would end up seeing less kind of referrals into multiple services, but actually them being triaged at the point of referral. And so hopefully what the paper does is kind of articulate the fact that there'll be a physical place with a physical team, but there'll also be a need for partners to think about how they might play into this, because if we're going to do that, that requires more than Staffordshire County Council working in that way. It requires all partners doing that. And so hopefully some of you will have known and seen that actually we've got send and inclusion hubs or MACE panels, for example, that meet and discuss children's needs on a district footprint. And the idea is that we use some of those place-based conversation forums to again build in that Family Hub model and make it fit for the future. So it's not about kind of starting anything from scratch, it's about building on the assets that we've got within our gift to make that happen. So at the moment, you know, a family or a child or young person accessing support might have a number of different ways to kind of get that support. This is trying to make the smoothness of the journey much more simple for people to understand, particularly as they transition into motherhood, you know, and have the first child. It's about making that journey as seamless as possible, and there is a real focus on the first 1,001 days, but also making sure that that support is much more geared up to meet the needs of families across that system. So hopefully the report kind of outlines some of the support that you would expect to see. Just to give you an idea, I'm not going to rattle through those. Those are the kind of support that they're expecting us to see. So lots of local authorities have been funded to provide this kind of model moving forward. As we said, Staffordshire isn't one of them. When you have been funded, that's the kind of offer that they would expect to see on hand. So just to give you an idea of what it might look like. And so some of that might be delivered in the physical place, some of it might just be delivered through a conversation, like we say, through the Send and Inclusion Hubs or MACE panels, and some of it might be virtual access to support, e.g. on the telephone. What I would say is I wouldn't underestimate the scale of the challenge that we're asking you all to embark on. So a lot of organisations have done a lot of work on trying to make sure that their services are accessed through a single front door. So for example, when I think about Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust, they've just managed to land all of their children's services being navigated through one single front door. So if you ring up for any services or support that are provided through MPFT, you would get that in an integrated way. What I'm asking them to do is say, actually, Staffordshire County Council, you've got your front door, MPFT, you've got your front door, I want all of these front doors to come together. So I'm not underestimating, like I say, the scale of the challenge really that we might face. Albeit, what I would say is that when we've been having the conversations with partners around our aspiration for the Family Hub model, everybody absolutely understands the need for it. Everybody can understand that it will make the journey of the child, the family and the parent much better. And they are showing some willingness to want to work towards it. The challenge they're saying is that actually it will take us time because we haven't necessarily got the investment or resource attached to it. So I suppose it's just helpful probably to manage people's expectations really around what we will achieve in a short space of time. And then the other part of this is about kind of sharing with you the vision for what our staffing structure might look like, and that's the private part. So I shall stop this part here and let you all ask any questions you might have.
Thank you for that. Any questions? Councillor Bennett.
Do we feel that the family hubs reach out enough and are run by qualified staff? Because there's a lot of sort of family hubs where they do sort of like volunteer sessions on various things that you've listed there. And some of them are really, really good. and they cater for people's needs. And then others, you tend to find that the volunteer will stay for a while it's something that they are interested in, like the breastfeeding, for example, for the first so many weeks, and they'll run it and supervise it, engage everybody, and then when they've got out of it what they want, they move on. And then there's like this gap there. How can we ensure that, you know, as these volunteers are moving through, that we're replacing them with other people that are suitable and keep on top of that?
Okay, so there's a couple of things there. So the first point I'd say is that the family hubs, we don't actually have any family hubs in Staffordshire yet. So this is seeking political support to move towards a family hub. So I think what you're probably talking about is the children's centres, which during COVID kind of started to try and start the concept really of a virtual family hub. So it was really around how could they reach out to communities within that broader Staffordshire area really. So you're right, Children's Centre's been working a long time in terms of trying to make sure that where possible parents are able to offer that peer support, because we know that you know, evidence will tell us that people are more likely to listen to somebody who is a trusted kind of adult within that community than they are necessarily a professional. So we know that that's a really beneficial way of kind of getting some of the information, advice and guidance across to parents that we need them to have. So we have done a lot of work in terms of volunteering. So we were lucky enough to benefit from some early outcomes funding, and we recruited a volunteer coordinator. And that coordinator has been working in Staffordshire for 3 years now and has done some absolutely fantastic work, not only in terms of trying to rethink the way in which we might think a volunteer would work, but also trying to make sure that we identify where might those potential gaps be, because you're absolutely right. Quite often, particularly with things like breastfeeding, people will do it at a particular point when it's pertinent and relevant to them. And so we do see a lot of people kind of moving on, you know, to other things and quite often getting paid work, which is absolutely fantastic. So she's done a lot of work on it. You know, there's still more we could do. And hopefully, like I say, when we touch on the private part and you see the staffing structure, you will have the opportunity to kind of comment on whether or not you think we've got that structure fit for purpose, bearing in mind that comment.
Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
I think this is great. Okay. There's just one comment I want to make, and it's relevant to the previous piece as well. You talk about the first 1,001 days, then you say from 0 to 2. It's from conception to 2. It's not from birth to 2. If it was from birth to 2, it would be 730 days. And therefore ideally starting preconception, to be honest, in terms of education and stuff, is crucially important. And I just think that even though district nurses and health visitors are listed in the professionals involved, and even though that's more health and social care in some ways, but not in all ways, the feel of the paper and the feel of the previous paper is that we get going when the child's born. I just want to emphasise that.
No, that's a reasonable point, yes, thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Natasha, you'll be glad to hear. I think it's very commendable what you're trying to do here. Brilliant. Let me say that initially. Absolutely fantastic what you're trying to do. And it will be an awful shame if it doesn't happen through lack of funding or the ability to attract additional funding. When you talk about a single point of access, that's brilliant. It does, however, depend upon all those organisations coming together, and we say this in all of the meetings we have about communicating and working together as one entity. It really is important that they all get on board with that and come to the table and make sure that all their systems are aligned. But other than that, I think it's a brilliant initiative. You should be congratulated, and I hope that we are able in some way to make sure the funding isn't an issue that stops it going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Natasha, I think you want to come back.
Can I be cheeky? You asked before in the previous paper whether or not members could do anything to help and support, and that's where I do think actually your support would be really well received. So I think, you know, all of the partners have said, you know, the early help strategy is something that they endorse. The family hubs is a delivery objective on that strategy, you know, as part of that plan. Again, partners have signed up to deliver that. I think it would be really helpful if we could come and talk to members more broadly around the family hub model and how you can help us to try and influence some of those partners to think about the benefits of working in this way for families and children. So if you would be so kind as to offer that again for this, we would be really kind of up for coming and delivering some support and training for members.
Thank you for that. Councillor Huckfield.
Can I just say, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned earlier on about, you know, some people cause waves. I'm one of those that causes waves. Can I just say, first of all, in June the 21st, right, I attended a meeting with the Vice Chairman to meet these young carers, right, and there was a young lad there, and he was 9 years of age, and his 3 sisters had all got problems, and really he was the carer, and his mother was having another baby. And I asked this young fella, right, what would, I said, as a county councillor and as a Staffordshire County Council, what would you like us to do? I said, in what way can we help you? And he loved painting, art, right? And he says, I'd love a little bit more time to myself. That's why I'm bringing that up now, right? Because somewhere along the line, right, I think this committee could go to the Cabinet, right, and ask, right, in what way they could help. Because when you see a young lad like that of 9 years of age, his life's gone. Because the saying is, if you give a child up to the age of 7, that's it, right? And he's 9, right? And he said to me, he says, I love my sisters. I love my sisters, right? And he was prepared to put himself out at 9 years of age, right? And if I can't bring that up at a meeting like this, there's something drastically wrong. And I will create waves. No matter what they are, right, at the end of the day, I think somewhere along the line, we can do something to help that lad out. And my colleague sitting next to me, who was there at the time and heard it word for word, and tell you, I am telling exactly the truth, right, and I'm asking you to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment, really, and a quick question to Natasha. On part 8 of the report there, you're talking about bringing in organisations. Has work been done in terms of youth offending services who will have a budget for intervention and preventative work, particularly around parenting and conflict within the parents and support with that? They may have a budget to contribute to this. Has that been sought? Thank you.
So we're at fairly early stages of the conversations with partners. We have had a conversation with the Youth Offending Service, mainly around the delivery of the MACE panels and some of the work they do in relation to saplings. Part of the work, I think, will be, like you say, easier to kind of badge under this model of working. But I think there is more work to do in terms of the systems, the processes, the understanding of who, how, and I think for us to do that and have those level of conversations with partners, they need to understand, well, what are we doing about it? So I think the plan is for us to take the paper through Cabinet to get agreement from the County Council to do that piece of work and then start to piece together that operational picture really then of what does the partnership response start to look like. So it's certainly something that Trandeep in his capacity as Family Hub Development Lead will be taking forward as we get the authority's permission, hopefully, to endorse this way of working.
Thank you for that. Councillor Eaglin.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, you've exceeded yourself this morning, Natasha. You've had a full report all morning. I think the Cabinet members had a bit of a rest today. Congratulations on this report. I would like to say that I can already offer my help because on behalf of my position on the County Council, I sit locally on the Family Involvement Board and they take children and pregnant ladies from day one and they see them right through. It's a wonderful organisation and I assume they've got them in all the other districts as well. So if you want any communications, get to me through that. And when my next meeting comes up, I will put questions that you've got before them, but well done.
Thank you for that. I think general support all round. Councillor Sutton.
So, just so Janet doesn't think I've sat here all day. I just wanted to go back to Derek Hookfield's point regarding a nine-year-old young carer. Well, we do have a carers service in the county that we commission, and there's a particular element of that towards young carers. And I'll just put the emphasis back to the councillor and ask whether he made a referral. I spoke to that trial about referring to that service, that 9-year-old, and also whether considered that a 9-year-old potentially looking after 3 younger children was a safeguarding issue, and whether he made a referral or spoke to anybody at Children's Services about that. So perhaps I could have a conversation off the record with you after this meeting, Derek, about that.
Thank you for that. I think just along those lines, we have another. We had several meetings with young carers. In fact, there's one, I think, on the 21st, is it? It's later on this month, and it's actually here in this building. So I think what we're going to do is to explore some of those things once all of those particular visits have been done. So we'll pick that up as a matter of course, Mark. Thank you. Just a couple of other quick things. I know from this, I mean, it sounds fantastic, just a hugely ambitious plan to get it off the ground, isn't it? I'm just interested, it talks about predictive analysis and evidence-based practice. Is that some, what does that mean?
Okay, so at the moment we have a number of different data sources, and I know some of you will be more familiar with some of those than others. So we have a system that's called FIDO. It's not a 7-up dog. It's actually a family identification database. So it basically takes data sets from a range of different partners. At the moment, it's currently got 70 different indicators in that database. So it basically starts to put your picture together at a family level. So it will build a picture of a family based on the information that partners hold on you and help to identify those families that would benefit from early help support. And so families have to consent for us to use that data in that way. But actually, once we have the data in the system, we can use it anonymously to start to predict who's more likely to come into our systems, what support they might benefit from. And it's something we've used as part of the Supporting Families, or BRFC programme, as it's known locally, already, to look at actually what support do families benefit from. So a couple of years ago we did a bit of work where we looked at those who are most likely to feel the benefits, and we identified that actually if you'd been referred in early enough for some family support in the early years, actually you were more likely to get to school ready to learn. And so what it starts to do, I think, is show partners actually where are the services and intervention and support that we can put into place that will make the maximum difference. So our plan is to use that data to broaden it out. So at the moment it doesn't include, for example, missed appointments with GPs or health visitors, and our aspiration is for it to include that data so that we can start to get cuter about who might have missed appointments again, which might be a predicator for later support that might be required. So yeah, the work and the aspiration around that is fairly meaty, but it is something we've got evidence that works and have practiced before.
No, thank you. Like I say, hugely ambitious, but it does sound like you've got a really good understanding of that. Any other questions? No? I think we're all in support. I think that was quite clear. It's just about how we all facilitate it and make it happen, isn't it? So we'll look forward to how that progresses. Thank you very much. I think we'll go to the second part of this, if you just bear with me. Item 10, yeah. Item 10 then, an exclusion of the public. I ask that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Schedule 12A as amended of the Local Government Act 1972. So before we